My family changed my grades, said you failed. The school's database showed a truth. My name is Elena Ravencrest. I'm 28 years old and I'm a doctoral candidate in biomedical engineering at Thornfield University. Last Tuesday evening was supposed to be the proudest moment of my academic life, the night I would defend my dissertation that could revolutionize cancer treatment. Instead, it became the night my own family tried to destroy everything I had worked for, until the university's database revealed a truth that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start from the beginning, because what happened that night wasn't just about grades or academic politics. It was about a pattern of betrayal that had been brewing in my family for years, hidden behind smiles and Sunday dinners, masked by congratulations that never quite reached anyone's eyes. The Ravencrest family has always been complicated. We're the kind of family that looks perfect in Christmas photos, but fractures the moment the camera stops clicking. My parents, Dr. Harold Ravencrest and Judge Patricia Ravencrest, built their reputation in Millbrook Heights on excellence, achievement, and most importantly, control. They expected nothing less than perfection from their children, and for most of my life, I delivered exactly that. But perfection, I learned, has a price that goes far beyond late nights in the library or missed social events. Sometimes the cost is trust itself. My older brother, Nathan, had always been the golden child. Star quarterback in high school, full scholarship to Princeton, law degree from Harvard, now a successful partner at Morrison & Associates. He was everything our parents wanted in a son: charismatic, connected, and completely comfortable with the spotlight that seemed to follow our family wherever we went. Then there was me, the quiet one, the one who preferred microscopes to microphones, who found solace in research labs rather than cocktail parties. I was brilliant, yes, but brilliant in a way that made people uncomfortable. I asked too many questions, stayed too late in the library, and worst of all, I had the audacity to choose a path that didn't fit neatly into my parents' social circle. "Why can't you be more like Nathan?" became the unofficial family motto, whispered during family gatherings when they thought I couldn't hear, spoken aloud during encouraging conversations about my future. But I persevered. I earned my bachelor's degree summa cum laude from Westmont College, completed my master's at Thornfield with a 4.0 GPA. And now, after 4 years of grueling research, I was finally ready to defend my doctoral dissertation. My research on targeted nanoparticle therapy for aggressive brain tumors had already caught the attention of 3 major pharmaceutical companies and the National Cancer Institute. This was supposed to be my moment, the moment when all those years of being underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued would finally pay off. The moment when I could prove that quiet determination trumps loud charisma every single time. I had invited my entire family to the defense. It was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. in the grand conference room of the Hartwell Medical Center. The examining committee consisted of 5 distinguished professors, including Dr. Amelia Whitmore, the department head who had mentored me throughout my doctoral journey. My parents flew in from Millbrook Heights. Nathan drove down from the city with his wife, Rebecca, and their 2 children. Even my grandmother, Evelyn Ravencrest, the family matriarch who rarely left her estate in Oakwood Manor, made the journey to witness what she called Elena's big moment. The atmosphere in the conference room was formal yet warm, academic tradition mixed with family pride. My research presentation was scheduled for 45 minutes, followed by questions from the committee, and then the final deliberation. I had practiced this presentation hundreds of times. Every slide was perfect, every transition smooth, every potential question anticipated and prepared for. My research was solid, revolutionary even. I knew I was ready. But as I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of my family seated in the back rows, something felt off. Nathan kept checking his phone, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. My father's expression was unreadable, his arms crossed in that way that meant he was preparing for disappointment. My mother sat rigid, her judge's mask firmly in place, as if she were already weighing evidence for a case I didn't know I was defending. I began my presentation. Distinguished committee members, family, and guests, thank you for being here tonight. My dissertation, titled Targeted Nanoparticle Delivery Systems for Glioblastoma Treatment, a Novel Approach to Crossing the Blood-Brain Barrier, represents 4 years of intense research that I believe will fundamentally change how we approach one of the most aggressive forms of brain cancer. The presentation went flawlessly. 43 minutes of precise scientific explanation, compelling data visualization, and confident delivery. The committee asked thoughtful questions that I answered with ease. Dr. Whitmore nodded approvingly. Even the notoriously difficult Dr. Pemberton seemed impressed. As the committee retired to deliberate, I felt a surge of quiet confidence. This was it. This was my moment of triumph. But then Nathan stood up. He walked to the front of the room, his expensive suit catching the light from the overhead projector. He didn't ask permission from the committee or seek acknowledgement from the moderator. He simply positioned himself between me and the audience, like a lawyer about to deliver a closing argument. Before this committee makes their final decision, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to be heard, "There's something you all need to know about my sister's academic record." The room fell silent. Dr. Whitmore looked confused. I felt my heart stop.
Nathan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've discovered some irregularities in Elena's transcripts that call into question her eligibility for this doctoral program." And that's when my perfect world began to crumble, one lie at a time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Building anticipation and emotional investment. The weeks leading up to my dissertation defense had been a whirlwind of preparation, anticipation, and carefully managed expectations. This wasn't just any academic milestone. This was the culmination of everything I had worked toward since I was 12 years old and first peered through a microscope in my 7th grade science class. 4 years earlier, when I first proposed my research on targeted nanoparticle therapy, the academic community had been skeptical. Too ambitious for a doctoral project, some said. The blood-brain barrier research alone could take a decade, others warned. But Dr. Amelia Whitmore, the woman who would become my mentor and champion, saw something different in my proposal. Elena, she had told me during our first meeting in her cluttered office overlooking the Thornfield campus, I've been in this field for 32 years, and I've rarely seen someone with your intuitive understanding of molecular medicine. This research could save thousands of lives. Those words had sustained me through countless 18-hour days in the lab, through failed experiments that sent me back to the drawing board, through moments when the stress felt overwhelming and the goal seemed impossibly distant. But now, finally, I was here. The Hartwell Medical Center conference room had been transformed for the occasion. The long mahogany table was polished to perfection, surrounded by leather chairs that had witnessed hundreds of similar defenses over the decades. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished faculty members, their eyes seeming to watch over the proceedings with scholarly gravitas. My presentation materials were arranged meticulously at the front of the room. 3 years' worth of research data, compiled into 127 slides that told the story of a breakthrough that could revolutionize brain cancer treatment. My laptop was connected to the high-definition projector, backup drives safely stored in my briefcase, and printed copies of my 300-page dissertation stacked neatly on the side table. The examining committee had assembled 20 minutes early. Their conversations were hushed but animated. Dr. Whitmore, as my advisor and committee chair, sat at the head of the table, occasionally glancing my way with an encouraging smile. Dr. Harrison Pemberton, the notoriously difficult professor of molecular biology, was reviewing my published papers with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. Dr. Sarah Chen Martinez from the pharmacology department chatted quietly with Dr. Robert Kellner, the external examiner from Johns Hopkins, who had flown in specifically for my defense. But it was the presence of my family that made this moment truly special. In the back rows, reserved for guests and observers, sat the people who had shaped my journey in ways both profound and complicated. My grandmother, Elena Ravencrest, had insisted on flying in from Oakwood Manor despite her arthritis and her general distaste for what she called academic theaters. At 84, she remained sharp as a blade, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her emerald brooch, a family heirloom, catching the light as she adjusted her position in the chair. She had been the first person to encourage my scientific interests, gifting me my first chemistry set when I was 10, and never once suggesting that I should pursue something more suitable for a young woman. My parents occupied the middle of the guest section, a study in contrasts. My father, Dr. Harold Ravencrest, sat with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His medical practice in Millbrook Heights had made him wealthy, but more than that, it had made him influential. He served on the boards of 3 hospitals and was a major donor to Westmont College, my undergraduate alma mater. Tonight, however, he wasn't Dr. Harold Ravencrest, pillar of the community. He was simply Elena's father, here to witness his daughter's academic triumph. My mother, Judge Patricia Ravencrest, maintained her characteristic composure. Even in this academic setting, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent 20 years making decisions that affected people's lives. Her dark suit was impeccable, her jewelry understated, but expensive, her expression carefully neutral in the way that judges learn to master. Nathan sat beside his wife Rebecca, their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old James, fidgeting quietly in their formal clothes. Rebecca had insisted on bringing the children, saying it was important for them to see their aunt achieve something significant. They need to understand that education matters, she had told Nathan, though I suspect she was really talking to him. The atmosphere in the room was electric with anticipation. This defense represented more than just my personal achievement. It was the culmination of collaborative effort involving dozens of researchers, hundreds of lab hours, and innovative partnerships with 3 major pharmaceutical companies. The National Cancer Institute had already expressed preliminary interest in funding the next phase of research based on my findings. As I made final adjustments to my presentation notes, I caught fragments of conversation from the audience. My grandmother was explaining to Emma and James what a dissertation defense was, using simple language that made the complex process sound like an exciting adventure. My parents spoke in low tones with the other family members, their voices carrying the weight of pride mixed with nervous energy. The examining committee were wrapping up their preliminary discussions, and I could sense the subtle shift in the room's energy that meant we were about to begin. Dr. Whitmore caught my eye and nodded slightly, a signal that it was time to begin.
This was it, the moment I had been working toward for 4 years, building upon 2 decades of academic preparation. In the next hour, I would present research that could change how oncologists approach one of the deadliest forms of cancer. I would demonstrate mastery of complex scientific principles, defend my methodology against challenging questions, and hopefully earn the right to be called Dr. Elena Ravencrest. The room fell silent as Dr. Whitmore stood to begin the formal proceedings. Every eye was on me as I took my position at the podium, my heart racing with excitement rather than nervousness. I had practiced this moment so many times that it felt like a familiar dance. I was ready. My research was solid. My family was here to support me. Or so I thought. The first sign that something was wrong came during the brief intermission before my defense officially began. Dr. Whitmore had called for a 10-minute recess to allow everyone to settle in and for the recording equipment to be properly configured. These defenses were always recorded for university archives and potential appeals, a standard procedure I had witnessed dozens of times during my years at Thornfield. As the committee members shuffled papers and adjusted their seats, I noticed Nathan had stepped outside to take a phone call. Through the conference room's glass doors, I could see him pacing in the hallway, his voice animated but too distant to make out words. What struck me as odd wasn't the call itself. Nathan was always conducting business, but the timing. He knew how important this moment was to me, knew that family phones were supposed to be silenced during academic proceedings. When he returned, sliding back into his seat with a satisfied expression, something in his demeanor had shifted. The nervous energy I had attributed to brotherly support was gone, replaced with a calm confidence that seemed almost predatory. He caught my eye and smiled, but it wasn't the encouraging smile of an older brother. It was the smile of someone who knew something I didn't. Rebecca noticed it too. I watched her lean toward him, whispering something that made him shake his head dismissively. Her brow furrowed with concern, but Nathan's attention had already shifted elsewhere. He was studying the committee members with the calculating gaze of a lawyer sizing up a jury, making mental notes about something I couldn't identify. My father, meanwhile, had begun what I initially mistook for typical pre-event networking. He approached Dr. Pemberton during the break, extending his hand with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to opening doors through charm and connections. "Dr. Pemberton, Harold Ravencrest. I don't believe we've met, though I've certainly heard about your groundbreaking work in cellular metabolism." The conversation seemed innocent enough. Two distinguished professionals making polite small talk. But I noticed my father's body language was more intense than usual, his gestures slightly more animated. He kept glancing toward me, then back to Dr. Pemberton, as if making some kind of point that required emphasis. Dr. Pemberton's responses were polite, but increasingly uncomfortable. The kind of strained courtesy academics use when they're being drawn into conversations they'd rather avoid. My mother had positioned herself strategically near the registration table where visitors had signed in upon arrival. As Judge Ravencrest, she was skilled at gathering information through seemingly casual conversation. She was speaking with Dr. Chen Martinez about university policies, asking questions that seemed academic in nature but carried an undertone of legal inquiry. "I'm curious," I heard her say as I pretended to organize my notes, "what exactly constitutes grounds for challenging a student's eligibility for doctoral candidacy? Hypothetically speaking, of course." Dr. Chen Martinez looked puzzled by the question. "Well, there would need to be evidence of academic misconduct, fraudulent transcripts, or failure to meet prerequisite requirements. But those issues would typically be identified during the initial review process, years before a student reaches the defense stage." "Of course," my mother replied smoothly. "I was just wondering about the procedural aspects. As a judge, I find academic governance fascinating." The exchange left me with an unsettled feeling I couldn't identify. Why was my mother asking about challenging eligibility on the night of my defense? It felt like a prosecutor laying groundwork for a case, though I couldn't imagine what case that might be. Even more disturbing was the way my grandmother kept looking at Nathan with an expression I had never seen before. Evelyn Ravencrest had always been the family's moral compass, the one person whose approval everyone sought
and whose disapproval everyone feared. She was watching Nathan with the keen attention of someone who had lived long enough to recognize deception in all its forms. When Nathan excused himself for a second time, this time to the restroom, my grandmother caught my arm gently as I passed her chair. "Elena, dear," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "has Nathan seemed different to you lately? More interested in your academic affairs than usual?" The question surprised me. Nathan had never shown much interest in my research beyond polite family dinner conversation. "Not really, Grandmama. Why do you ask?" She studied my face with those sharp eyes that had intimidated 3 generations of Ravencrest children. "Last month, when you visited Oakwood Manor to show me your preliminary results, I mentioned to Nathan how proud I was of your work. He asked very specific questions about your timeline, your committee members, even your grading history from undergraduate school. At the time, I thought he was finally taking interest in his sister's achievements." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of specific questions?"
He wanted to know if I had ever failed any courses, if I had ever received academic probation, if there had ever been any irregularities in my academic record. She paused, her voice taking on a harder edge. Questions that felt more like an investigation than family curiosity. Before I could process this information fully, Dr. Whitmore called the room back to order. Everyone settled into their seats, and the formal defense proceedings began. But my grandmother's words echoed in my mind as I walked to the podium. Why would Nathan be asking about academic irregularities? What possible reason could he have for investigating my student record? As I began my opening remarks, I noticed Nathan had taken out a legal pad and was taking notes. That itself wasn't unusual. Many family members wanted to remember details from such an important event. But the way he was writing, the intense focus he brought to his note-taking, suggested he was documenting something more significant than proud brother memories. Halfway through my literature review section, I saw him check his phone discreetly. A brief smile crossed his face as he read whatever message had arrived. He showed the screen to my father, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The exchange was so subtle that I doubt anyone else noticed, but it felt significant in a way that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. Dr. Pemberton, who had seemed uncomfortable during his conversation with my father, was now asking more probing questions than usual. His inquiries weren't unfair or inappropriate, but they carried an edge of skepticism that felt different from normal academic rigor. He questioned not just my research methodology, but my fundamental understanding of concepts I had mastered years ago, as if testing whether my knowledge was authentic or somehow borrowed. "Ms. Ravencrest," he said at one point, using the title that technically applied until my defense was complete, "I'm curious about the timeline of your breakthrough discovery. The leap from your Year 2 preliminary results to your Year 3 major findings seems remarkably rapid. Could you walk us through exactly how that progression occurred?" The question felt loaded, though I couldn't identify why. I answered comprehensively, detailing the months of failed experiments that had preceded the breakthrough, the collaboration with the pharmaceutical research team that had provided crucial insights, the late-night revelation that had led to the novel approach. My answer was thorough and honest, but Dr. Pemberton's expression remained skeptical throughout. As I continued my presentation, I became increasingly aware of my family's behavior in the audience. They weren't acting like proud relatives witnessing a milestone achievement. They were acting like observers at a trial, waiting for something specific to happen. And Nathan, I realized with growing alarm, wasn't just taking notes. He was checking items off a list, as if my presentation was confirming details he had already compiled. Whatever was happening here was bigger than a doctoral defense. It was some kind of setup, and I was walking directly into it without understanding the rules of the game. The moment had finally arrived. After 47 minutes of detailed presentation covering 4 years of groundbreaking research, I was approaching the crescendo of my defense, the section where I would present my most significant findings and their potential impact on cancer treatment worldwide.
The committee had listened intently throughout my presentation, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated their engagement with my work. Even Dr. Pemberton, despite his earlier skepticism, had begun nodding approvingly as I detailed my methodology and results. The data was undeniable, the implications profound, and the potential applications revolutionary. Distinguished committee members, I said, advancing to my final series of slides, what you're about to see represents not just the culmination of my doctoral research, but potentially a paradigm shift in how we approach glioblastoma treatment. The slide that appeared on the screen showed a three-dimensional molecular model rotating slowly with its nanoparticle structure highlighted in brilliant blue against a dark background. Beside it, clinical trial data demonstrated a 73% improvement in targeted drug delivery across the blood-brain barrier, results that stunned even my most optimistic projections. These nanoparticles, engineered with a novel protein coating derived from modified transferrin receptors, have demonstrated unprecedented success in penetrating the blood-brain barrier while maintaining therapeutic payload integrity, I continued, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was presenting. Dr. Whitmore leaned forward, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. Elena, these results are extraordinary. The implications for patient outcomes could be transformative. Dr. Chen Martinez was studying the data tables intently. The selectivity index you've achieved, I've never seen anything approaching these numbers in blood-brain barrier research. How did you solve the stability problem that has plagued similar approaches? This was my moment of triumph. The question I had been hoping someone would ask. The stability breakthrough had been the eureka moment that transformed promising research into revolutionary science. I explained, feeling the familiar surge of excitement that accompanied discussing my discoveries. The key breakthrough came in year 3 of my research. Instead of using traditional polymer stabilizers, I developed a biomimetic coating that essentially tricks the blood-brain barrier into recognizing the nanoparticles as naturally occurring compounds. I clicked to the next slide showing electron microscopy images that revealed the elegant structure of my engineered particles. By incorporating modified albumin fragments with specific amino acid sequences, we created what I call molecular camouflage. The particles appeared to the body's natural defenses as beneficial rather than foreign. The room had gone completely quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers as committee members took notes. This was the kind of silence that occurs when experienced researchers recognize that they are witnessing something genuinely groundbreaking.
Dr. Kellner, the external examiner from Johns Hopkins, had been silent throughout most of my presentation, but now he spoke up. Ms. Ravencrest, I have to say, in 35 years of reviewing doctoral research, I have rarely encountered work of this caliber. The potential therapeutic applications extend far beyond brain cancer. You've essentially solved one of the most persistent challenges in targeted drug delivery. Behind me, I could hear subtle movement from the audience section where my family sat. I assumed they were adjusting their positions to get better views of the presentation, sharing quiet moments of pride as they witnessed their daughter and sister achieving academic distinction at the highest level. My father had taken out his phone and appeared to be recording the proceedings, something that would normally be prohibited, but given his status as a prominent physician and major university donor, the committee seemed willing to overlook the breach of protocol. I felt a warm surge of gratitude that he was documenting this moment for family history. The next phase of research, which I hope to pursue as a postdoctoral fellow, I continued, will involve human clinical trials in partnership with the National Cancer Institute. We have preliminary approval for a Phase 2 study involving 50 patients with advanced glioblastoma. If these results translate to human subjects, we could be looking at a fundamental change in treatment protocols within 5 years. I advanced to my final slide, which showed a simple but powerful projection. Survival rate improvements for patients with various forms of brain cancer. The statistics were staggering. Potential increases in 2-year survival rates from 15% to 60%. 5-year survival rates jumping from virtually 0
to 35%, and quality of life improvements that could transform the final months or years of patients' lives. In conclusion, I said, looking out at the faces of the committee members who held my academic future in their hands, this research represents not just a doctoral thesis, but a potential lifeline for thousands of patients who currently face a terminal diagnosis with limited hope. The silence that followed was pregnant with significance. Dr. Whitmore was smiling broadly, clearly pleased with her mentee's performance. Dr. Pemberton, despite his earlier reservations, was nodding slowly in what appeared to be genuine admiration. The entire committee seemed impressed by both the scientific rigor and the humanitarian implications of my work. This was it, the moment of academic triumph I had been working toward for so many years. The validation that quiet persistence and intellectual courage could overcome any obstacle. The proof that Elena Ravencrest, the overlooked younger sibling who had always lived in Nathan's shadow, had something valuable to contribute to the world. I felt a profound sense of completion, as if every challenge I had faced, every late night in the laboratory, every moment of self-doubt had been leading to this perfect culmination. My research would help people. My work would save lives. My voice would finally be heard in a field that desperately needed fresh thinking and innovative approaches. The committee was preparing to excuse me for their deliberation period when Dr. Whitmore stood to make what I assumed would be concluding remarks before the final evaluation. Elena, before we move to the deliberation phase, I want to say that in my 32 years in academia, this has been one of the most impressive defenses I have had the privilege to witness. Your research is not only scientifically sound, but potentially life-changing for countless patients. I felt tears of joy threatening to blur my vision. This was everything I had dreamed of and more. Recognition, respect, and most importantly, the opportunity to make a real difference in the world through scientific innovation. But as I opened my mouth to express my gratitude to the committee and my family, Nathan stood up in the audience section. He didn't wait for permission or acknowledgement. He simply rose from his seat with the confident bearing of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. And in that instant, I realized that my perfect moment of triumph was about to become something else entirely. Nathan moved with the calculated precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment multiple times in his mind. He stepped into the aisle between the audience seating and the committee table, his expensive suit catching the overhead lights as he positioned himself where every person in the room could see him clearly. Dr. Whitmore, esteemed committee members, he began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a courtroom attorney addressing a jury. I apologize for this interruption, but before you proceed with your deliberations, there are some critical facts about my sister's academic record that you need to be aware of. The room fell into stunned silence. Dr. Whitmore blinked in confusion, clearly unprepared for this unprecedented breach of academic protocol. I'm sorry, Mr. Ravencrest, but this is highly irregular. Family members are not permitted to address the committee during defense proceedings. He smiled, not the warm smile of a supportive brother, but the cold, confident expression of someone holding a winning hand in a high-stakes game. I understand the irregularity, Dr. Whitmore, but as a member of the bar and someone with legal standing in this matter, I believe you'll find that what I have to share takes precedence over standard procedures. He reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder, the kind lawyers use for depositing evidence in major cases. The folder was clearly labeled and organized, suggesting this was not a spontaneous revelation, but a carefully prepared presentation. What I'm about to show you, Nathan continued, his voice growing more authoritative with each word, are discrepancies in Elena's academic transcripts that call into question her eligibility for this doctoral program and, more importantly, the authenticity of the research she has just presented.
I felt the blood drain from my face. The triumphant warmth I had experienced moments before was instantly replaced by cold dread. "Nathan, what are you talking about? What discrepancies?" He turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in my brother's eyes that I had never seen before. Genuine contempt. Not disappointment, not frustration, but active dislike masked by years of family politeness. "Elena, I know this is difficult, but the truth has to come out." His tone was patronizing, the way someone might speak to a child caught in an obvious lie. "You see, committee members, 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by an anonymous source who had concerns about certain irregularities in Elena's undergraduate transcripts from Westmont College." Dr. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Ravencrest, I really must insist that you follow proper channels for any academic concerns. This is neither the time nor the place." "Dr. Pemberton," Nathan interrupted smoothly, "I believe you'll agree that academic fraud trumps procedural concerns, especially when it involves research that could potentially endanger patients if it's based on falsified qualifications." The words, "academic fraud," hit the room like a physical blow. I heard my grandmother gasp audibly from her seat. Rebecca was staring at Nathan with an expression of horror, clearly as shocked by this revelation as everyone else in the room. Nathan opened the folder and began laying out documents on the nearest table. These are Elena's original transcripts from Westmont College, obtained through official channels. As you can see, her actual GPA was 3.1, not the 3.9 that appears on her graduate school application. More troubling, she failed organic chemistry twice and received academic probation during her junior year for what the dean's office termed academic dishonesty involving laboratory results. My mouth opened, but no words came out. What he was showing the committee was impossible. Those weren't my transcripts. I never failed any classes. "Elena," he said, turning to face me with what appeared to be genuine sadness, "I know it's hard to accept, but the evidence is overwhelming. You've been living a lie for so long that you might actually believe your own fabrications." My father stood up from his seat in the audience, his face grave with what looked like paternal disappointment. "I'm afraid Nathan is right. Your mother and I have been concerned about Elena's relationship with the truth for some time. We hoped she would come clean on her own, but when Nathan brought this evidence to our attention, we realized we couldn't allow her to potentially harm patients with fraudulent research." Judge Patricia Ravencrest rose beside her husband, her courtroom composure intact despite the family drama unfolding. "As difficult as this is for our family, we felt obligated to ensure that the integrity of the academic process is maintained. Elena's pattern of deception cannot be allowed to continue." The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just Nathan, it was my entire family, presenting a united front against me in the most important moment of my academic life. They weren't just attacking my research or my credentials, they were systematically destroying my character in front of the very people whose respect and validation I had worked so hard to earn. Dr. Whitmore was stricken, torn between her faith in her mentee and the seemingly overwhelming evidence being presented against me. "Elena, I don't understand. These allegations are completely contrary to everything I know about your character and your work." I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that everything Nathan was saying was impossible, that the documents he was showing were somehow falsified or fabricated. But as I looked around the room, at the committee members' expressions of shock and disappointment, at my family's coordinated presentation of evidence against me, and the carefully prepared documents that looked disturbingly official, I realized something chilling.
This wasn't a spontaneous revelation or a family intervention born of genuine concern. This was a calculated attack, planned and executed with precision. Nathan hadn't just stumbled upon these supposed irregularities, he had orchestrated them. My own family hadn't just reluctantly supported his findings, they had actively participated in what could only be described as a coordinated campaign to destroy my academic career. But why? What possible reason could they have for wanting to sabotage everything I had worked for? As Nathan continued laying out his case against me, presenting document after document that painted me as a fraud and a liar, I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process not just the accusations themselves, but the meticulous planning that had gone into this moment.
They had waited until the exact peak of my triumph to deliver this blow. They had ensured that the maximum number of witnesses would be present. They had prepared their evidence with legal precision and presented it with courtroom theatricality. This wasn't family concern or academic integrity. This was warfare. Nathan moved with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building an airtight case, spreading documents across the table with theatrical flair. Each piece of paper he laid down seemed to carry more weight than the last, creating a damning mosaic of apparent evidence that grew more overwhelming with every revelation. "Let me walk you through the timeline of deception," Nathan said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering closing arguments in a capital case. He pulled out a document stamped with official seals from Westmont College's registrar office. "This is Elena's authentic transcript from Westmont College, obtained directly from the registrar 3 weeks ago through proper legal channels." The transcript he displayed showed a student record that was devastating in its mediocrity. Course after course showed grades ranging from C- to D+, with 2 prominent Fs in Organic Chemistry 1 and 2. The cumulative GPA listed at the bottom read 2.97, barely above the minimum required for graduation. "As you can see," Nathan continued, pointing to specific entries with a laser pointer he had somehow produced from his briefcase, "Elena failed organic chemistry not once, but twice. She was placed on academic probation during her junior year and required to repeat her entire spring semester due to what the Academic Review Board termed systematic falsification of laboratory data." Dr. Pemberton was studying the document intently, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. The letterhead appears authentic, and these administrative codes match standard university formatting because they are authentic. What Elena submitted to Thornfield University's graduate admissions office was a carefully fabricated version of this transcript. Someone with access to university systems or sophisticated document creation software altered her grades, removed the probation notices, and inflated her GPA to make her appear qualified for graduate study. He produced a second transcript, this one showing the stellar academic record I remembered earning, the 8.38 GPA, the Dean's List recognition, the honors designations that had earned me competitive graduate school placement. Placed side by side with Nathan's version, the differences were striking and damning. "This forged transcript," Nathan said, tapping the document that showed my actual achievements, "was submitted to Thornfield University's in Elena's graduate school application. Notice how the formatting is slightly different, how certain administrative codes don't match current university standards, and how the paper stock appears to be commercial grade rather than official university stationery." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The transcript he was calling forged was the real one. I had ordered it myself from Westmont's registrar, had watched the administrator print it directly from the university database. But somehow Nathan had obtained what appeared to be an equally official version, showing completely different grades. "The pattern of deception continues into her graduate work," Nathan said, pulling out a thick folder of research documents. "These are publications from Dr. Marcus Hoffman at the Berlin Institute of Technology, published in the Journal of Advanced Nanomedicine 18 months ago." The papers he displayed were covered in yellow highlighting and red annotations. Side by side with printouts of my dissertation chapters, the similarities were highlighted in devastating detail.
Entire paragraphs appeared to match. Scientific methodologies seemed identical, and even some of the molecular diagrams bore striking resemblances. Dr. Whitmore was reaching for the documents, her face pale with shock. "Elena, I need to ask you directly, do you have access to Dr. Hoffman's research during your dissertation work?" My voice caught in my throat. I'd never heard of Dr. Hoffman, had never seen his research, but the evidence Nathan was presenting made it appear as though I had lifted entire sections of my dissertation from his work. "Elena," my mother interrupted, rising from her seat with the authority of someone accustomed to presiding over life-changing verdicts. "We know about the pharmaceutical consulting work you claim to be doing. We know about the supposed collaboration that gave you access to advanced research databases." She approached the table where Nathan had laid out his evidence, adding her own folder to the growing collection. What Elena told us was collaborative research with legitimate pharmaceutical companies was actually unauthorized access to proprietary databases containing cutting-edge research from institutions around the world. The documents my mother produced appeared to be server logs and access records showing login attempts to restricted databases, IP addresses that supposedly traced back to my apartment, and download records of files that included Dr. Hoffman's research papers. "We have evidence," she continued in her measured judicial tone, "that Elena used sophisticated hacking techniques to gain access to research that should have been restricted. She then incorporated this intellectual property into her own dissertation, presenting it as original work. Dr. Chen Martinez was examining the server logs with increasing alarm. If these records are accurate, this represents not just academic misconduct, but potentially criminal activity. Unauthorized access to proprietary research databases is a federal crime." My father stepped forward, his expression a perfect mixture of disappointment and reluctant duty. "As a physician, I understand the pressure to publish groundbreaking research, the competition for recognition, the desperation to stand out in a crowded field. But, Elena, what you've done here goes beyond academic misconduct. It's fraud that could endanger patients if this research ever reaches clinical trials."
He produced yet another folder, this one containing what appeared to be correspondence between myself and various research institutions. These emails, recovered from Elena's personal accounts through legal discovery processes, show a pattern of deception spanning several years. She contacted dozens of research facilities claiming to be a postdoctoral researcher with credentials she didn't possess, requesting access to proprietary data under false pretenses. The emails he displayed were damning in their apparent authenticity. They showed someone using my name and email address making requests for sensitive research data, claiming affiliations with institutions where I had never worked, and presenting credentials that were clearly fabricated. Dr. Kellner, the external examiner from Johns Hopkins, was reviewing the evidence with the systematic approach of someone who had evaluated countless research misconduct cases. The pattern here is consistent with what we see in sophisticated academic fraud schemes: multiple points of deception, careful forgery of credentials, and systematic plagiarism of cutting-edge research. What's most troubling, Nathan added, his presentation building toward its climax, is that Elena has been living this lie for so long that she may have convinced herself it's true. When we confronted her with preliminary evidence 3 weeks ago, she denied everything and became increasingly agitated when pressed for details. This was news to me. Nathan had never confronted me with any evidence, had never mentioned any concerns about my academic record. But my grandmother was nodding sadly from her seat, as if confirming this supposed confrontation. Elena has always been creative with the truth, my grandmother said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of family knowledge. Even as a child, she would fabricate elaborate stories to explain away poor performance or difficult situations. We hoped she had outgrown this tendency, but it appears to have only become more sophisticated. The betrayal was complete and devastating. Not only had my family coordinated this attack, but they had constructed an alternative narrative of my entire academic career, one in which I was a chronic liar, a fraud, and potentially a criminal who had stolen my way to the doctoral level through systematic deception.
The committee members were exchanging troubled glances, clearly struggling to reconcile the Elena Ravencrest they thought they knew with the person being described by my own family. Dr. Whitmore looked as though she might be physically ill, torn between years of mentoring what she believed was a brilliant student and the overwhelming evidence being presented against me. But as I stood there, listening to my family systematically destroy every achievement I had earned through years of dedicated work, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If they could fabricate this much evidence, if they could coordinate this elaborate deception so seamlessly, then they had been planning this for far longer than 3 weeks. The question that haunted me wasn't whether I could defend against these accusations. It was why my own family had invested so much time and effort into destroying me at the moment of my greatest triumph. What could possibly motivate this level of calculated betrayal? The room waited for me to respond, to defend myself, to protest the accusations that were systematically dismantling everything I had worked for. Every eye was on me. The committee members with their mixture of shock and disappointment, my family with their coordinated expressions of reluctant duty, even the university staff members who had gathered near the doorway after hearing the commotion. But I didn't speak. I didn't shout denials or demand explanations. I didn't point out the impossibilities in Nathan's timeline or challenge the authenticity of documents that couldn't possibly exist. I didn't break down in tears or collapse under the weight of accusations that should have destroyed any innocent person. Instead, I stood there with my hands clasped calmly in front of me, my spine straight, my expression unreadable. I looked at each member of my family in turn. Nathan with his prosecutor's confidence, my parents with their masks of disappointed authority, even my grandmother with her performance of sorrowful confirmation, and I said nothing. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Dr. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly expecting me to mount some kind of defense against the overwhelming evidence being presented. Elena, these are very serious allegations. Don't you have anything to say in response to this evidence? I turned to look at her. This woman who had guided my research, who had believed in my potential, who had spent countless hours helping me refine my methodology and perfect my presentations. For a moment, I considered trying to explain what was really happening, trying to convince her that everything my family was presenting was an elaborate fabrication. How could I explain that my own family had spent months creating false documents, fabricating evidence, and constructing an alternate version of my academic history? How could I convince anyone that parents and siblings would invest such effort into destroying someone they claimed to love? So I simply shook my head once, a small gesture that could be interpreted as either an admission of guilt or a refusal to dignify the accusations with a response. Nathan stepped closer, his expression shifting from prosecutor's confidence to something that looked like genuine concern. Elena, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's difficult to face the consequences of decisions that seemed harmless at the time, but the committee deserves honesty. The academic community deserves integrity.
His performance was flawless, the caring older brother reluctantly exposing painful truths for the greater good. If I hadn't been the target of his accusations, I might have been impressed by his ability to project sincerity while systematically destroying someone's life. The evidence speaks for itself, I said quietly, my voice so low that several committee members leaned forward to hear me clearly. It was the first thing I had said since Nathan began his presentation, and the words carried a weight that seemed to satisfy his expectations. Dr. Pemberton interpreted my response as a confession. Miss Ravencrest, are you acknowledging that these transcripts and research documents are accurate representations of your academic misconduct? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had questioned my knowledge earlier as if testing whether my expertise was genuine. I'm saying that everyone in this room will believe whatever they choose to believe, regardless of what I say. My mother stepped forward, her judicial authority lending gravity to her words. Elena, what Dr. Pemberton is asking is whether you admit to falsifying your transcripts, plagiarizing research, and fraudulently representing your qualifications to this university. The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Every person in the room was focused on my response, understanding that my answer would determine not just my academic future, but potentially my legal fate if criminal charges were pursued. I admit, I said slowly, choosing my words with careful precision, that I have been living a version of truth that my family finds unacceptable. It was not a confession, but it sounded like one. Nathan's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, clearly interpreting my words as vindication of his accusations. My parents exchanged glances that suggested their difficult task was nearly complete. Dr. Whitmore looked stricken. Elena, I need you to be more specific. Are you admitting to academic misconduct? I studied her face, this woman who had been more than a mentor, who had been a champion, an advocate, someone who had seen potential in me that others overlooked. I wanted to tell her that everything she had believed about my work was true, that the research she had guided was genuine, that the breakthrough she had celebrated was real. But I also understood something that none of them had grasped yet. This attack wasn't really about my transcripts or my research. Those were just tools being used to achieve an objective that had nothing to do with academic integrity. Dr. Whitmore, I said, meeting her eyes directly, you have known me for 4 years. You have watched me work, guided my research, observed my methodology. You have seen me struggle with failed experiments and celebrate breakthroughs that kept me in the lab until 3 a.m. You know whether my work is authentic. She blinked, clearly torn between her personal knowledge of me and the evidence being presented by my family. Elena, I thought I knew, but this evidence, I continued, gesturing toward the documents Nathan had spread across the table, tells a story that someone wants you to believe. The question you need to ask yourself is not whether I'm guilty of the accusations being made, but why my own family would invest so much effort into making these accusations in the first place. Nathan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of concern crossing his features. He hadn't expected me to redirect attention toward his motives rather than defending against his evidence. Elena, he said, his voice taking on a note of warning, you're deflecting. The committee needs clear answers about your academic record, not conspiracy theories about family dynamics. But Dr. Chen Martinez had picked up on something in my response. Miss Ravencrest, are you suggesting that this evidence has been fabricated? That your family has coordinated some kind of false accusation? The question created a moment of tension that rippled through the room. The possibility that the evidence itself might be fraudulent hadn't occurred to most of the committee members, but now that it had been raised, it cast everything in a different light. My father stepped forward quickly, his medical authority lending weight to his denial. Dr. Chen Martinez, I understand that Elena might be grasping for explanations, but what you're suggesting would require an elaborate conspiracy involving multiple institutions, forged documents from official sources, and coordination between family members who have nothing to gain from Elena's academic failure. He was right, of course. The scope of fabrication required to create this much false evidence would be staggering, involving resources and connections that seemed beyond the reach of a normal family. It was easier to believe that I was guilty than to accept that such an elaborate deception was possible. But as I looked around the room at the faces of people trying to make sense of an impossible situation, I realized that my silence was accomplishing something my words never could. By refusing to play the role they expected, the desperate defendant pleading innocence, I was forcing everyone to question not just my guilt, but the entire narrative being presented. The silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And somewhere in the building, I knew that the real truth was about to walk through the door. The tension in the conference room had reached a suffocating peak when the double doors at the back of the room swung open with deliberate force. The sound cut through the charged atmosphere like a blade, causing every head to turn toward the entrance.
A woman entered with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention without demanding it. She appeared to be in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray business suit that spoke of authority and success. Her silver hair was pulled back in a precise chignon, and she wore minimal jewelry except for a simple gold watch and what appeared to be a small lapel pin that caught the light as she moved.
What was most striking about her entrance wasn't her appearance, but her absolute confidence. She walked into that room as if she owned it, as if she had every right to be there, despite the fact that no one seemed to recognize her or understand why she had arrived. She moved with purposeful strides down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that seemed to count down to something inevitable. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the committee members, the scattered documents on the table, my family's coordinated positions, and my own silent stance near the podium. Dr. Whitmore was the first to find her voice. "Excuse me, but this is a closed academic proceeding. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to—" "Dr. Whitmore," the woman interrupted, her voice carrying a crisp authority that immediately silenced the room. "My apologies for the dramatic entrance, but I believe this committee needs to see certain information before making any decisions about Ms. Ravencrest's academic standing." She carried a slim leather portfolio, which she placed on the table next to Nathan's scattered evidence. Unlike Nathan's theatrical display of documents, her materials were contained, organized, and somehow more menacing in their restraint. "And you are—" Dr. Pemberton asked, his tone carrying the irritation of someone unaccustomed to having academic proceedings interrupted by unknown individuals. "Dr. Victoria Sterling," she replied, producing a business card that she handed to Dr. Whitmore. "I serve as the Director of Academic Integrity and Research Verification for the National Science Foundation. I also hold advisory positions with the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division." The credentials hit the room like a series of small explosions. The National Science Foundation was the primary federal funding agency for scientific research. The Department of Education's Office of Inspector General investigated academic fraud at the highest levels, and the FBI's involvement suggested that whatever was happening here had implications far beyond a simple doctoral defense. Nathan's confident expression wavered for the first time since he had begun his presentation. My parents exchanged glances that carried a hint of concern, though they maintained their composed exterior. "Dr. Sterling," my mother said, rising with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling courtroom proceedings, "while we appreciate federal interest in academic integrity, this is a family matter that—" "Judge Ravencrest," Dr. Sterling interrupted smoothly, somehow knowing exactly who my mother was without being introduced, "I'm afraid this stopped being a family matter the moment it involved federal research grants, falsified government documents, and potential violations of multiple federal statutes." She opened her portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, placing it on the table where everyone could see the official letterhead of the National Science Foundation. 3 weeks ago, we received an anonymous tip about potential irregularities in the academic credentials of a doctoral candidate at Thornfield University. The tip included specific allegations about transcript fraud and research plagiarism. Dr. Kellner leaned forward, his experience as an external examiner helping him recognize the significance of federal involvement. "Dr. Sterling, are you saying that the allegations being presented here today were previously reported to federal authorities?" "Not exactly," Dr. Sterling replied, her tone carrying the measured precision of someone who chose words carefully. "We received the tip, but when we began our preliminary investigation, we discovered something much more interesting than simple academic fraud." She moved to stand directly in front of Nathan, studying him with the analytical gaze of someone trained to detect deception. "We discovered that the person making the allegations had accessed multiple federal databases without authorization, had obtained confidential academic records through fraudulent requests, and had coordinated with several accomplices to fabricate evidence supporting those allegations." The room fell into absolute silence. Nathan's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "Dr. Sterling, I'm not sure what you're implying, but—" "Mr. Ravencrest,"
she said, her voice cutting through his attempted response. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts that are supported by digital forensic evidence, witness testimony, and documentation that your family has unknowingly provided us over the past 3 weeks." She withdrew another document from her portfolio, this one bearing the seal of the FBI. "This is a federal search warrant executed yesterday at Morrison & Associates, the law firm where you work. Our digital forensic team recovered deleted files from your office computer showing extensive research into document forgery techniques, communication with individuals who specialize in academic credential fraud, and detailed planning documents outlining what you termed Operation Family Honor." My grandmother gasped audibly from her seat, her hand flying to her chest as if she had been physically struck. Rebecca was staring at Nathan with an expression of horror, clearly learning about her husband's activities for the first time. "Furthermore," Dr. Sterling continued, producing another official document, "we have evidence that you accessed your sister's personal email accounts, her university records, and confidential research databases using credentials obtained through identity theft and social engineering." Dr. Chen Martinez was studying the FBI documents with growing amazement. "Are you telling us that all of this evidence against Elena was fabricated?" "Not fabricated, carefully constructed using sophisticated techniques and significant resources. The transcript alterations were performed by someone with access to administrative systems. The plagiarism allegations were created using legitimate research papers that were deliberately modified to create false similarities. The email correspondences were generated using spoofed accounts and falsified timestamps." She turned to address the entire committee. "What you've witnessed here today is not an exposure of academic fraud, but academic fraud in action. Mr. Ravencrest and his accomplices have committed multiple federal crimes in an attempt to destroy his sister's academic career." Nathan finally found his voice, though it came out strained and defensive. "This is ridiculous. Why would I possibly want to sabotage Elena's career? What could I possibly gain from?"
$12 million, Dr. Sterling said simply. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $12 million was enough to destroy families, to motivate elaborate conspiracies, to drive people to commit crimes they never would have imagined. $12 million in research grants and pharmaceutical licensing agreements that were to be awarded to Elena upon successful completion of her doctoral defense, Dr. Sterling continued. Money that would have made her financially independent and professionally prominent. Money that certain family members believed should remain within their control. She placed one final document on the table, this one showing financial records and legal documents that painted a picture of motivations I was only beginning to understand. "The question isn't why Elena would commit academic fraud," Dr. Sterling said, looking directly at my family. "The question is why her own family would go to such elaborate lengths to prevent her from succeeding." And suddenly, everything that had happened in this room made terrible, perfect sense. 5 months later, I stood in front of a lecture hall at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, looking out at an audience of 200 researchers, oncologists, and medical professionals who had gathered to hear about the breakthrough that would soon revolutionize brain cancer treatment. The same research that my family had tried to destroy was now being hailed as one of the most promising advances in targeted therapy in decades. But this wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about something much more important. "The clinical trials have exceeded our most optimistic projections," I told the audience, clicking to a slide showing survival rate improvements that still amaze me even after months of reviewing the data. "Patient response rates are approaching 78%, with minimal adverse effects and significantly improved quality of life measures." Dr. Whitmore, who now served as co-director of our expanded research program, nodded approvingly from the front row. Our relationship had been awkward for weeks after the defense incident, but she had eventually become one of my strongest advocates, using her influence to ensure that the research continued despite the family scandal that had briefly threatened to derail everything. The aftermath of that devastating Tuesday evening had unfolded with the methodical precision of a federal investigation. Nathan was arrested 2 days later on charges including identity theft, computer fraud, falsifying federal documents, and conspiracy to commit academic fraud. The legal proceedings revealed the full scope of his scheme, which had involved not just the fabricated evidence presented at my defense, but also attempts to sabotage my research partnerships and damage my professional reputation through anonymous complaints to regulatory agencies. My parents, while not charged with crimes, were stripped of their positions on various academic boards and faced professional sanctions that effectively ended their influence in academic circles. The judge who had spent decades presiding over cases involving fraud and deception was now facing questions about her own family's ethical standards. Perhaps most painfully, my grandmother, the one family member I had believed was genuine in her shock and disappointment, had been revealed as the mastermind behind the financial motivations. Her estate planning had designated Nathan as the primary beneficiary of family wealth, conditional on maintaining the family's social standing and professional prominence. My success threatened not just Nathan's ego, but the inheritance structure that had been designed to keep family resources concentrated in his hands. Rebecca had filed for divorce within a week of Nathan's arrest, taking Emma and James to her parents' house in Vermont. She sent me a handwritten letter apologizing for not recognizing the signs of her husband's deception and expressing hope that someday her children might understand why their aunt had been targeted by their father's ambition and jealousy. But standing in that lecture hall, discussing research that would save thousands of lives, I realized that the real story wasn't about Nathan's crimes or my family's betrayal. It was about what happens when you refuse to let other people's limitations define your potential. The research grants and pharmaceutical licensing agreements that had motivated Nathan's conspiracy had indeed materialized, but I had done something with that money that no one in my family had anticipated. Instead of using it for personal wealth or social advancement, I had established the Ravencrest Foundation for Women in Science, providing scholarships and research funding for female doctoral candidates whose work showed promise, but whose backgrounds made them vulnerable to the kind of systematic undermining I had experienced. The foundation has already supported 43 women whose research was being questioned, delayed, or sabotaged by colleagues, advisors, or family members who believed that recognition should go to someone else. I continued, clicking to a slide showing photos of young women in laboratories, at conferences, accepting awards, making discoveries. We've learned that excellence often emerges from the shadows, from people who've been underestimated so consistently that they develop the resilience and determination necessary for truly groundbreaking work. Dr. Marcus Hoffmann, the German researcher whose work Nathan had used to create false plagiarism allegations, was sitting in the third row. He had flown in from Berlin specifically to attend this presentation, fascinated by the way his legitimate research had been weaponized in an academic fraud scheme. We had become collaborators in the months since the scandal, working on expanded applications of nanoparticle therapy that combined his European research with my American clinical trials. The most important lesson I've learned, I said, addressing the audience but thinking about the young women who would face similar challenges in years to come, is that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's strength, and sometimes it's the space you create for truth to emerge on its own timeline.
The presentation concluded with a standing ovation, but as I gathered my materials and prepared to leave the podium, I noticed a familiar figure in the back of the auditorium. Rebecca stood near the exit, holding Emma's hand, while James fidgeted beside her. She had driven down from Vermont, she explained later, because Emma had asked to see Aunt Elena's important science talk. We met for coffee afterward in the hospital cafeteria, an awkward reunion that gradually warmed as Emma peppered me with questions about molecules and cancer cells and why some people get sick while others stay healthy. James, now 8, was more interested in whether I had ever blown anything up in my laboratory experiments. "They ask about their father sometimes," Rebecca said quietly, while the children examined a molecular model I had brought to show them. "I don't know what to tell them about why he did what he did." I watched Emma carefully manipulating the carbon atoms in the model, her face serious with concentration. "Tell them that sometimes people make terrible choices when they're afraid of being overshadowed by someone else's light, but that doesn't mean the light should dim itself to make other people comfortable." Rebecca nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Elena, I need you to know that I never suspected. I thought Nathan was just being protective of the family reputation. I had no idea he was actively trying to destroy your career." "I know," I said, meaning it. Nathan was very good at making his actions seem reasonable, even noble. That's what made him so dangerous. As we prepared to leave, Emma looked up from the molecular model and asked, "Aunt Elena, are you famous now because of your smart medicine?"
I knelt down to meet her eyes. I'm not famous, sweetheart, but my research might help sick people get better. That's more important than being famous. Will you teach me how to make smart medicine when I'm bigger? If that's what you want to learn, I promise, I'll teach you everything I know. Later that evening, I sat in my office at the National Cancer Institute, reviewing applications from the latest group of Foundation Scholarship recipients. Each application told a story of potential undermined by circumstances, of brilliant minds struggling against systems designed to exclude them, of women who refused to accept limitations imposed by others. One application particularly caught my attention. A young woman from rural Montana whose groundbreaking research on genetic therapies was being challenged by a department chair who questioned whether someone from her background could produce such sophisticated work. Her advisor was supportive, but lacked the political influence to protect her from systematic harassment designed to force her out of the program. I approved her application immediately, then made a note to contact her personally. Some battles require more than financial support. They require mentorship from someone who understands that excellence often emerges from the most unexpected places. The phone rang as I was finishing my review. Dr. Whitmore's name appeared on the caller ID. Elena, I just wanted to let you know that the National Science Foundation Board approved our expansion proposal. We'll be able to fund 12 additional research positions next year, all focused on underrepresented researchers whose work shows exceptional promise. That's wonderful news, I said, though I wasn't surprised. The foundation had grown beyond my original vision, becoming a network of researchers, mentors, and advocates who understood that diversity of backgrounds leads to diversity of solutions. There's something else, Dr. Whitmore continued. The American Association for Cancer Research wants to present you with their Distinguished Service Award at next year's annual conference. It comes with a platform to address 15,000 researchers from around the world. I considered the opportunity, the chance to speak to the largest gathering of cancer researchers on the planet, to share not just my scientific findings, but the story of how those findings nearly didn't survive the people who were supposed to support them. I'll accept, I said, but I want to share the platform. There are other women whose stories need to be told, whose research deserves recognition, whose voices haven't been heard yet. Dr. Whitmore chuckled. I wouldn't have expected anything else from you. After ending the call, I stood at my office window looking out at the lights of Bethesda, thinking about the young women who were at this moment sitting in laboratories around the world, working late into the night on research that might change everything, unaware that somewhere people were plotting to undermine their achievements. To those women, wherever they are, whatever challenges they're facing, I want to say this. Your excellence doesn't require anyone else's permission. Your brilliance doesn't need to be validated by people who never expected you to succeed. And your silence, when strategically chosen, can be more powerful than any defense. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your innocence. It's creating a world where the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles you did. The research continues. The foundation grows. And somewhere tonight, a young woman is making a discovery that will save lives, despite everyone who told her she wasn't smart enough, wasn't connected enough, wasn't enough. She is more than enough. We all are. And that truth, once established, becomes unshakable, no matter who tries to tear it down. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just quick and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.